because of this progression from an NFT project to a completely unrelated chain development, we ended up with a group of people that really believed in what was happening in a very organic community, because anyone that didn't believe in it has been shaken out 4 times over the past 3 years. And so what you're left with is like a diehard cult that like believes in everything you're doing. And then to this point of like, how do you onboard people moving forward? I think there's a couple different ways that we do that.
Today's guest is Jack Melnick, the head of DeFi at Berachain. Jack and I are not related, although my name is Jacquelyn Melnick. We have no relation to each other. We just happen to be in the same industry. And yeah, we've known each other for years at this point. I've known Jack throughout his career, and essentially I'm excited to talk to him today about his role at Berachain. If you don't know what Berachain is, it is an L1 that is EVM compatible. It also has something called proof of liquidity, which we will talk about today as well. If you've heard about it, it's probably because they've raised a ton of money. They have over $2 billion in pre-launch deposit vaults, which we will also discuss. Lots to talk about here, Jack. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jackie. It's a pleasure to be here.
For sure.
For anyone listening, I am related to Jackie. She's lying to you.
Shut up. We are not related. We actually, we derive probably from the same tribe of white people way back when. Yeah. But I really don't know other Melnicks. So,
no.
But you're exactly. Melnick. I'm Melnick. That's where we break. That's where we break. All right. Since I already know you, I'm going to ask this question for our audience. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a little bit of a different journey than some, but probably one that's gonna become increasingly normalized. I have zero tech background whatsoever. I was a philosophy major back in school and then went into traditional finance afterward. Started moonlighting in DeFi in 2019, kind of accelerated in 2020. And then by 2021 was a full-blown degen. I then was writing research as an anon for about a year period there, working with some of the bigger DeFi protocols. I wrote for Frax and another one called Redacted Cartel, which is now Dinero. And then moved full-time to a company called The Tie, which is actually where I met Jackie back in the day. And I wrote research there for financial institutions in crypto, focusing on DeFi, L1s, and crypto trends broadly. And so it was a nice way to transition from my TradFi knowledge into the space. And then kind of had this moment of realization where I was like, I'm here to build stuff. I love contributing to protocols, and that's what I want to do. And so made the jump from there to Polygon, where I was head of DeFi for about a year and a half, and then joined Berachain about 9 months ago. I've been involved with Berachain for almost 3.5 years, in that I originally acquired one of the NFTs that then, by a long and windy series of events, led to a blockchain almost 3.5 years ago. And have known Smokey for nearly as long. And we've been chatting about working together for probably 2.5 of those. And so this was always felt like somewhere that I was going to end up. And eventually we managed to just make the timelines work. And it's been a fantastic time so far.
Are you part of the Bearer Baddies?
You tell me.
Oh my God.
The bracelet on. I'm ready.
All right, there we go. King Bearabaddy himself. You talked about like kind of having that degen moment. What was that for you? Because like you've had a lot of different jobs throughout the space, but there must have been a moment where you were like, okay, this is really what I want to like dive deep into, and I want to get in the weeds. Because being the head of DeFi isn't, I would imagine, an easy job. And you have to be pretty technical for someone who's not technical. So you have to really love it. You know what I mean?
You are absolutely correct. Like I always joke with folks that even if nothing in crypto had any value, like I'd probably still be here moonlighting
You'd
on
be
the
last
side.
guy, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I really love it. And, I didn't come in technical, but I think at this point I would, I'm never going to be an engineer, but I would describe myself as quite technical. And I think for me, it was having the TradFi background let me see a lot of the products in DeFi for what they were, right? And so I wasn't someone who was coming in like truly naive on how finance worked and thought like DeFi was this magical thing that would allow Ponzi's to be self-perpetuating motion machines. But I came in and I saw a lot of the implementation for what it was. It was a way to remove counterparties and take more calculated payoffs within a different universe of financial products. And I think as well, my background with, foreign family and foreign parents that have gone through whatever various hardships in the past and made me also, I think, a real believer in things like self-custody and self-ownership of funds and having the agency to have control over that part of your life and your destiny. And I think those two things combined to start getting me crypto pilled. And then there were a handful of applications, both like during the original DeFi summer, just the sheer wave of froth and excitement and euphoria. It was almost impossible not to get caught up in it, regardless of what your level of exposure was. And I'm not going to lie and say that I saw through all of it and only found the beautiful financial primitives that lived underneath. Like, no, I was swept up in it like everyone else. But then when the dust kind of settled and everyone else, went back to their day jobs, I stayed because I then saw a lot of the things that were left and I thought they were awesome and I wanted to continue building on top of them.
And then for Berachain, you talked about how you've known the team for years. First of all, how'd you even get introduced? And then secondly, what made you decide to see the vision through and be like, yeah, this is where I want to be?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this a little indirectly at the start. And one of the things that initially attracted me to crypto was when I got into traditional finance, I was promised this like meritocratic entrepreneurial environment where what you get out is the product of your work. And to a degree, there are pockets that's true, like working at a hedge fund and all these other things. But the vast majority of like large banking orgs are just like any other large company. There's like massive levels of bureaucracy and time there and all these other things. And on the hedge fund side, you're really forced to make personal concessions that I didn't personally want to make. Actually, like when I got into crypto, I had like an offer from a group that was spun out of Citadel and then a crypto job. And so like that was my fork and I chose the crypto one, obviously. But the thing that really got me into it was that like crypto felt very meritocratic in a large part because of anon culture. And I've always been very attracted to anon culture. And as a result, right, like when I was getting into this space, one of the things I loved was that if I was working on research on something or modeling something, I just had to DM someone on Twitter and they would respond and talk to me about things. And so the same thing kind of happened at Berachain, right, in that it started off as this really just community focused NFT project, very, very grassroots. And we've been building everything largely in the open for the past 3 years, which is why folks have been hearing about it for so long. It wasn't like you heard about it only after we were a year and a half in, after a Series A announcement or something like that. And I met kind of the team in the same exact way, where I knew them as anons until 9 months ago. And even today, if someone asked me to tell them Smokey's legal name, I don't think I actually know I could not. Right. And so for me, the entire relationship was predicated on the value and the ideas that each of us was bringing to the table. And that was something that meant a lot to me. And I knew Smokey and I, who I work really closely with, see very eye to eye on things. We tend to agree in terms of like how to bring product to market and what's interesting and the ethos and tenets that we want to build Berachain on. And so it became like a very natural fit for me. I actually even spoke to him about working at Berachain prior to joining Polygon, but they were still a little far away from having a product ready. And so when I was exploring next steps, he was literally the first person I called and the only person I called as it ended up.
Nice. I know he goes by Smokey and you have a nickname as well. Is it Cap'n Jack Bearow? Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
So does everyone go by anonymous names internally or like pseudonymous names?
Yeah, I would say there's a big range. And so internally, most people have pseudonyms of some capacity. The team ranges from fully doxed, like we have a corporate development guy, Adam, who is fully doxed because he has
Adam's
to work with large corporations. Yeah, Adam's just Adam. I'm what I like to call soft doxed, in that I've been full doxed in the past. My handles at this point are now undoxed, but like if you really wanted to find out who I was, I'm not making an effort to hide it or anything. And then some of our founders remain full anon. Maybe they'll dox over time. Folks know who they are visually from events and things like that. I have independently confirmed that there's nothing concerning about their real identities, but and in fact, like I actually give them a lot of credit because I think had they revealed who they were, given the track record and pedigree that they have from their previous lives, a lot of things like fundraising would have been significantly easier. But they actually made the choice to kind of go the harder route of being fully pseudonymous because that portion of the crypto ethos meant a lot to them.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, why have some of you gone that full route, partial route, etc.? Because I feel like sometimes people like poke fun at the anonymity of individuals in the space. The guest we just had on before this episode, he's fully anonymous in the sense that it's a security issue. But when it comes to, or not the most recent, but an episode before this, and then like for some people, it's like, oh, I just don't want my family knowing that I made so much money. And then for other people, maybe it's a merit-based thing. But I feel like it's a tricky topic because sometimes you're putting your faith into projects where you, like you just said, okay, he's a good guy, I promise. And I have to then trust Cap'n Jack Bearow. But then it's like, how do I actually know? You know what I mean? Like, and I'm sure I've met Smokey in person like once, but I feel like it's a difficult, you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Because there are some projects out there where you find out after the fact where you're like, oh shit, that was the person behind it.
And so it's a good question, right? I think internally, folks make the decision largely based off of personal preference, right? There's no broad sweeping mandate of you have to be anon or you can't be anon. Some folks make it for OPSEC reasons. We have plenty of those internally. Right. Some folks like myself do it because that's a cultural thing that we love, and it's an important part of what got us into the industry. Like if I had revealed when I was first getting into crypto that I was whatever, like a 22-year-old, I think it would have been a lot harder in some capacity to get involved with the things I did.
Right.
But because I was being judged on my knowledge of the space rather than other intrinsic qualities, I was able to do things that I wouldn't have been able to do in any other job. And then, independently, our founders, just to be clear, are like docs to our VCs and stuff like that. And so there's been plenty of due diligence and their docs to a sufficient number of people.
I'm not starting anything on this episode.
I'm just being clear.
Yes.
But look, and the answer is that you shouldn't trust, right? That's the entire point of crypto. And there are folks out there that use pseudo-anonymity to extract value. Right, 100%. And our goal is to show you that Berachain should be judged off of the strength of its products and off of its ecosystem and off of the community that it brings to the table, and not because our founders were professors at whatever school or did whatever in the past.
So they were professors?
No, we are not a professor coin, thank God. Bearish.
Okay, also the name Berachain.
Bearish is bullish now, and then bullish is also bullish. Like, how can you lose?
Okay, the bullish bears. The bullish Berachain.
The name just started because the original NFT collection had bears in it. And in fact, like even if I'll quickly turn my camera, sorry, editor. Even if you look around the office, you can see bears floating on the walls and things like that. And so, that was a core part of the original identity. And so when they transitioned from building an NFT collection to building a chain, it was a pretty natural one.
I feel like Berachain has culminated a very strong community. Even from like an outsider perspective, I'm like rooting it on and I'm not even a part of it. How does that happen? Do you think it stems from the NFT collection? And then like, obviously it started there, but not every NFT collection garners that type of attention and love and then turns into a chain, right?
Yeah.
So like, what was the strategy behind that? And even now today, what's the plan to grow it from like here to there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think that it wasn't the plan in any way, shape, or form. Like I always joke with Smokey. I say, look, man, if I shipped you back to 2021 in a time machine, could you actually run this back? And it's like, maybe, right? Like there's some things that are real, but there are a lot of elements that were just the right people in the right place at the right time. And for us, when we were first starting off, and I was just a community member back in the day, all of this discussion has been happening in public, right? Like our seed deal was published on the Olympus DAO governance forums in 2022. Right. The majority of the seed investors were community members in DAOs rather than like large VCs. And the NFTs, which will be a meaningful part of the ecosystem going forward, were distributed, have been liquid and tradable, and will be, like I said, a core component of the ecosystem from day one. And so the end result is that you see this increasing meta of shifting away from solely VC funding to doing things like echo sales to get money in the hands of the community at reasonable valuations and try and create value alignment and all these other factors. For us, that happened really organically. It wasn't something that we had to force at the end to try and generate that. And then on top of that, because of this progression from an NFT project to a completely unrelated chain development, we ended up with a group of people that really believed in what was happening in a very organic community, because anyone that didn't believe in it has been shaken out 4 times over the past 3 years. And so what you're left with is like a diehard cult that like believes in everything you're doing. And then to this point of like, how do you onboard people moving forward? I think there's a couple different ways that we do that. The first is by doubling down on the folks over and over and over that have been alongside us every step of the way. And so you look at things like the request for proposal program that I launched about 5 months ago. That was designed to allocate a meaningful portion of our supply to the developers and communities that have been building on Berachain and been by our side for the past couple of years. And then going forward, I think one of the really fun things about Berachain is that you can kind of have like a pick your own adventure level of involvement, in that there's a lot of memetics that surround Berachain because of the name, right? The site goes up only. You say BM instead of GM, right? Like all these small details make it really easy as an outsider to choose your level of involvement, right? I can go on Twitter or Discord and just say the little phrases, or I can get involved with the Bera baddies if I want that portion, or I can do whatever I want to do. And then the nice thing is we actually have the ecosystem and the tech stack to underpin it, where the memetics are the tip of the iceberg, and then the diehard community helps do our job for us, where then when the user is ready to make that plunge and dive in deeper and learn more about whatever portion they find interesting, they don't have to come to me. They can go to some random person in the community who knows as much as I do about this stuff, and they can get onboarded there. And so it becomes a very grassroots movement, and folks want to pay it forward because they had someone onboard them 2.5 years ago, and they now want to onboard others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like the sense of belonging really makes a lot of sense for these blockchain ecosystems and also for the longevity of it, right? Because if you don't feel like you're a part of a community, or if the community that you're in constantly feels like it's bogging you down, I'm sure some people could think of some where it's just like so hostile. Like I'm not a part of some of them, and I'm like, you guys all need to go to therapy together, you know? But like,
I don't want them attacking you in the Twitter.
I'm like, so I don't want to be a part of this. Yeah. But I feel like if I tweeted like BM, I think I would get some responses, some nice ones. Maybe we'll throw that on this episode.
I bet you would get insane engagement, right? The community just loves it.
Yeah. So if you want to join the Berachain community, where would you even tell someone to start? Let's say you got a listener here who knows nothing about it.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it depends what your level of comfort and experience is in crypto. If you're someone who's really into tech and understanding product differentiation at a core level, start with the Berachain documentation, start with the GitHub. We just open sourced our core repo. And so folks are interested in that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. For most folks, right, I think that isn't them, right? And what they really want to understand is, what does the ecosystem look like? What are the things to do? What's the community like? I think starting on Twitter is a great way. Start with the Berachain handle, search Berachain, go to the Kaido Yaps leaderboard for Berachain, and you can see who the top folks are that talk about Berachain on a regular basis. And just start getting yourself involved in the community in terms of understanding the language, understand the culture, understand what drives folks. And as part of that, like the community tends to be really DeFi and crypto native by extension of the things that we spoke about before. Mm-hmm. And so you'll also start to see them talk about product and talk about ecosystem applications and talk about initiatives. And starting there, reading these short explainer threads, I think is a great way to get involved. And some of them will pique your interest, right? And you'll want to jump down this rabbit hole of, wait, this application does what? And it uses proof of liquidity. How? What does that even mean? And so as you explore these different tangents, I think you'll start to get involved in a really unique way. We have an excellent Discord moderation team. The Discord ranges from extremely mentally ill in some channels to relatively focused and slightly mentally ill in others.
Oh my God.
And so there's a lot of good places to get involved there. And then there's also a lot of literature that I've written and other folks have written internally on things like the blog that go through proof of liquidity basics. What are some of the tenets that Berachain was built on? What are some of the initiatives that we're running? And then finally, if you want to actually explore and try out applications, mainnet will be live very soon, or maybe is live potentially. I don't know when this will happen, but when this will go live. But,
January 30th.
Okay, mainnet will be live pretty soon, and
Okay.
so
coming soon.
coming soon. And so come mainnet, you'll be able to try a lot of these different applications in prod. But we also have the most active testnet ecosystem of, I think, almost any chain in history, if not of any chain in history. There's over 100 different applications on testnet. You can explore those through ecosystem.berachain.com. That gives a list of different applications and different verticals to try out. You can explore that through Berachain.xyz, which does something similar. That one is community curated. You can explore that by things like DapDap, which released a product called Berachain, which is I know everyone likes to talk about chain abstraction. It's a chain abstracted front end that allows you to do swaps, application integrations, all of those sorts of things from a single front end. Make it really, really easy to start getting your feet wet in the eco.
Damn, Jack, you got all the keywords in there. You covered all the ground. Amazing. Okay, so mainnet's coming soon.
Very soon.
Wow.
Q5. Yeah.
Q5. There's no such thing.
They want you to think.
Yeah, right. I mean, whatever. It's crypto. You can make whatever you want. Q5, Q6. Everything.
Yeah, if we delay again, it's Q6. It's okay.
Right. You brought up 100 plus different dApps protocols building already in testnet. What are some of the categories?
Deployed on testnet.
Deployed. Okay, so what are some of the categories there? What can people kind of expect, or what are you interested in that you're seeing?
Yeah, 100%. It's pretty crazy. I think we had 150-ish on testnet, something like that, and then it must have been higher because I think it was 150 on testnet, and then 250 to 300 that are planning to deploy on mainnet, which for me is a mind-boggling number. The categories I think are really interesting are DeFi, both like DeFi as people think about it from a classic perspective, which is like I'm going to a Uniswap front end and providing liquidity or swapping. But also I think something I've been pretty opinionated on for quite a while is that over time, as we get some of these other application types on chain, be it consumer facing apps or DePIN or whatever it is, all of those things will have DeFi on the back end. And so taking opinionated bets on what are the integrations from a backend perspective that really help these applications create value. We have some fun DePIN things being launched on Berachain, including the often popular on Twitter vape to earn, which is actually more like quit to earn, but that isn't quite as sexy.
Wait, so if you quit vaping, you will make money?
Yeah, and so basically it's pretty cool. So the company that's launching it is actually, I think they sold like hundreds of thousands of vapes from like a trad perspective. And then what they basically built is like this device that has pods that have certain nicotine contents, and it measures how often you hit them and what the nicotine content is. And then basically like your cadence of lowering nicotine over time. And if you're consistently lowering nicotine and then eventually moving to like the green tea only pods, you get rewarded for that. And the idea is you then can sell the data to like healthcare companies because you have really good data on like smoking cessation.
That's what I was going to say. It sounds like they're lab rats. It's like, good luck not being addicted to this.
Yeah, lab rat to earn doesn't have the same je ne sais quoi though. So
yeah, but I mean, like that's novel in its sense. Do you have other like DeFi kind of protocols and things being built on Bera then as well? Because that kind of reminds me of like DeFi.
Yeah, so there's definitely some good DePIN things happening, which is like the decentralized proof of physical infrastructure, basically. The DeSci stuff, some of our founders have kind of like biotech type backgrounds, and so they tend to be extremely opinionated on things like DeSci, and their take is that the vast majority of this is a total grift right now. Okay, no DeSci. Yeah, well, no. So there are specific things out there that I think have some potential legs. But they want to be very focused in terms of what we're actually like going to be spending time on that category. And candidly, it's a little outside of my comfort zone, and so I'm gonna let them handle it. We will not ask any more DeSci questions to you, Jack. We talked about proof of liquidity briefly in the intro. Can you kind of explain what that is? Why does it matter? And how does it differ from maybe other L1s out there? As many of you know, the Ethereum ecosystem is vast, but it's still extremely fragmented.
Are you tired of how complicated it is to move assets across different chains? I know personally, I am. So with that said, I want you to meet Across, the most reliable, fastest, and cheapest bridge in the Ethereum ecosystem. Across has over 15 billion bridged and 1.7 million users. It's making cross-chain transactions simpler for everyone. Its intent-based design means users will get lightning-fast transfers between Ethereum and L2s like Base, Arbitrum, and Optimism in seconds, not minutes. For users, it's seamless bridging. For developers, it's providing native cross-chain integration. Across Protocol is erasing boundaries and unifying Ethereum. Experience the future of unified crypto infrastructure at across.to. That's across.to. Catch you all there.
Yeah, absolutely. So proof of liquidity is something that Berachain designed, created. It's something I think other folks will adopt over time, but we are the first adopters kind of by necessarily. Let me give kind of a short analogy that I think will help folks reason on why this stuff matters. And the first portion of that analogy is, let's talk really simply about how blockchains are valued. In simplest terms, a blockchain's value, like its real value, is equal to the number of blocks the chains produce multiplied by the average value of those blocks, right? Very, very simply. Most chains, by nature of software engineering and tech folks, will look at the first category and they go, I need more blocks, right? How do I get more blocks? And so every chain that's launching, I think to date, is really focused on how do I get more blocks? How do I get better throughput? And they treat that as the primary vector for onboarding new users because you can support scale. I think Berachain came at it from a little bit of a different perspective, which is how do we build a really modular environment from a tech perspective where over time, as throughput gets better, we can easily swap these parts out to new parts to ensure that we're not going to get bogged down from a throughput perspective like ETH mainnet has as of late. And then second is how do we actually create better economics on top of the chain to make that average value of block be higher? Because we were looking at the chains that were out there and we kind of said to ourselves, like, none of these chains are bottlenecked on throughput right now, really. Everyone's kind of just bottlenecked on onboarding users. And the way that you onboard users is by having good dApps. And the reason that a lot of these places struggle and so much of the chain ecosystem environment is predicated around things like grant programs, right? Is because there isn't a good way of systematically returning value to builders codified in the chain. And so that then brings us to proof of liquidity. What is proof of liquidity? Proof of liquidity is this economic engine that sits on top of what is otherwise a fairly standard proof of stake chain, with some minor nuance there that we can get into if you care. But basically what it is designed to do is to return value to dApps and users as the first order goal of the chain, and then to validators and to the chain itself as a second order. And I'll give a quick example of why that matters as well, right? And so think of like a chain, one of the new L1s that comes out, and there's all this hype, and they launch and they have a 25 or $50 billion fully diluted valuation, and they pay 10% inflation a year to stakers for validation. That's $2.5 to $5 billion of net new issuance for economic security. And then you look at their TVL numbers and they might have $1 billion or $2 billion of TVL. And so they're actually paying validators like 2 to 2.5 times more for economic security than applications even have demand for economic security. And that's assuming that applications need $1 of stake for every dollar of TVL, which is also, I think, a little dubious, right? And ideally, right, what you'd want is you'd want to take that surplus and give it back to the application so that they can scale and grow and create more demand for economic security. That isn't what happens. And so what instead happens, you overpay validators, and then the foundation dips into their pockets and then gives money to apps to hopefully normalize that. What would be a better alternative? A better alternative would be to, within the chain mechanism, actually have applications by default get the block reward. So they get the 2.5 to 5 bill of inflation. And then they say to validators, I will give you some incentive, basically, to give my application this money instead of some other application. And so now you've effectively created a free market for block rewards where applications bid to receive block rewards and validators get paid based off of the bids for those blocks, in effect, right? And so then as a result, what ends up happening is, let's say you have this situation where demand for economic security is lower than block rewards. Well, applications might bid 50 cents on the dollar for that. And then as TVL grows, their bids will grow because they have more demand for economic security, because their tokens are worth more, because they have to support more TVL, all of these things. And so validators will start getting 70 cents on the dollar, and then 80 cents on the dollar, and then 90 cents on the dollar, right? Until it normalizes. Okay. And then if the inverse happens, right, your system normalizes in the other direction. And so in effect, right, you now have created a model that allows a blockchain's economic engine to normalize regardless of what's kind of happening between the consensus read validators and the execution, which is like users and applications. The last small piece that we did, and then I'll stop rambling, is if you think about like how most L1s work today, their token serves a lot of roles simultaneously. It's the gas token and it's the stake token. And then maybe you figure out some ways to get fees in there and have ultrasound money, and then ultrasound money gets rugged. And then like all of these things are like, you have an asset that's trying to do a lot of things at once, and then in practice ends up doing a lot of things not very well. Instead, what Berachain did is we actually separated this out into two tokens: Bera, which is the gas and the stake token. So if you spin up a new validator, you have to pay for transactions. That's what you use. And then BGT, which is the inflation token. And so all new issuance from block rewards is in BGT. It's the governance token. And then it's also a fee token in that if you provide liquidity to an application that is participating in proof of liquidity as a user, you earn BGT. Once you have BGT, you can either then burn it for Bera, which is liquid, and BGT is non-liquid, it's non-transferable by default. Or you can delegate it to a validator. And by delegating to a validator, every BGT that a validator has delegated to them increases the size of their block rewards, which makes them more profitable because of that exchange with applications. And by delegating, you also get rev share basically with that validator from any money that they take in from their block rewards. And so now you've really isolated out the fee and the operational components of your tokens such that folks can opt into only the portion that they care about, which in turn makes each stronger within its given role.
How many validators are there then currently?
I think we kind of like at steady state will end up at 156 or something like that. The reason for that number is basically that Berachain is not just EVM compatible or equivalent, it's like actually EVM identical. And so what that means is we're running unmodified ETH clients on the execution side out of the box. And so if you did that and had ETH consensus on the validator side, you would just have ETH block times and ETH throughput. And that's obviously not what we want either. And so basically what you do is you make some kind of like small trade-offs in terms of the size of your validator set. And then we made some other changes in terms of how we handle consensus. And basically those two things in tandem allow us to support, loosely 2-second block times at fairly high throughput, while retaining that kind of like full equivalency with Ethereum.
Okay. And then there's also Honey, the stablecoin, right?
Honey, yeah.
So how does Honey play into this?
Yeah. Honey, in the original design, played a more involved role. And then I think post Terra, although it was not an algorithmic stablecoin, we recognized that like involving stablecoins in kind of the core operation of a chain scared a lot of people. And so Honey in its current implementation is actually like very, very simple. It's always fully collateralized by other stablecoins, and other stablecoins can get added to the backing pool by governance over time within some kind of like very strict oversight. But the general idea is that it serves as a liquidity defragmentation tool, primarily, in that if you have USDC and PYUSD and USDT and like all of these different options, that actually creates liquidity fragmentation, because rather than having a single stable pool for each asset, you have 5 different pools. And so each pool on average is 1/5 the size. And by aggregating all of those major kind of centralized trusted stables into a single wrapper, you're able to reduce the number of pools and increase the average depth of each pool, which creates better UX on execution.
Okay. Interesting. I'll be honest, Jack, some of these things went over my head. But I think, yeah, go ahead.
It's okay. My job is to make sure that you don't have to know about any of this, right? Yay! And it just feels like a nice experience, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. But what about with, you said it's not EVM compatible, it's EVM what? You used a funnier.
Identical.
EVI identical. Okay. So
yeah.
That's amazing.
This is it's like one of those things where it's again, like, who cares? And the answer is like 99% of users don't. And that's but I totally think reasonable.
The reason I'm going to ask is like cross-chain compatibility. Like, do you see an option to then expand into other EVM compatible chains?
Yeah, so the really cool thing is that it makes the developer experience very, very easy in that, like, if you have something deployed on ETH mainnet and you deploy on other EVM equivalent chains, there's usually small modifications that you have to make because to get to higher levels of throughput, right? Like I think AVAX is a good example. They're running I believe it's a modified version of Reth, which is an Ethereum client under the hood. And that's what enables them to support that like higher level of throughput. And so like those minor changes can create minor developer differences, which allows us to be quicker to the draw on getting new applications onboarded. And like I said, our goal is always like developer first, user first, right? And so this allows us to achieve that. The other really cool effects are that too, we get upgrades to Ethereum as they happen, right? And so if you think of like when blobs went live, all of these L2s and Alt L1s, like if they wanted to support blobs, it required them to do a bunch of extra engineering work. For us, it's fairly straightforward in that like we can just take the Ethereum clients as they are after they get upgraded and plug them in, as long as it doesn't touch the consensus component. And that then makes it very easy. And then the third thing that is a nice effect of this is we actually already have like a half a dozen folks plus maybe at this point building L2s on Berachain. And the nice thing is we actually don't really have to do anything to support that because Arbitrum Orbit works out of the box on Berachain because our execution environment is identical to ETH mainnet. And so from a tech roadmap perspective, it really allows us to accelerate on all these line items and minimize the amount of like core modifications we have to do to something that like already works.
You brought up before the focus on developers and users, and it kept making me think about like other chains in the ecosystem who like to claim the same. I would love to know kind of your perspective on the state of L1 blockchains today, especially as someone, in a budding ecosystem or one that's, almost at its mainnet, where you're seeing all these other ones that have made good choices, bad choices, and maybe like you're learning from their mistakes, or maybe you're not paying attention to them at all. I'm curious how you kind of look at the rest of the broader ecosystem and like how you want Berachain to scale up against it.
Yeah, it's a super good question and not one I get often. I think the answer is I absolutely pay attention to other chains, and not necessarily from the perspective that you might think, but mostly just because like I really find the space super interesting and I want to see what other folks are doing for innovation. I think a lot of chains struggle to generate community and they try and do it ex post. It's like, I'm going to do tech first, and then after I do tech, the community will largely follow. But the problem is that to our point earlier, the X to the N marginal improvement in throughput doesn't actually create a tangible difference for users unless you have the right applications onboarded to showcase it, and unless you do the right job of educating users on why it matters and creating a community that's actually interested in what's happening. I think those are things that we have done very, very well. And I think there are other folks that we see doing the same, right? Like I think Initia has a very nice combination of tech and community growth that I've seen. I think Movement's been doing a really good job of this. And I think Mega ETH with some of the Mega Mafia applications of like leaning into that idea of like, I need applications to showcase what I'm doing has been really important in this like new wave of L1s and L2s. And, I think to that point, right, you end up with hopefully like a better mix of applications. I think this legacy mindset of I'm going to use grants to create that ends up being really ineffective. And in fact, like we offer no grants ever. We're like pretty hardline on that. And it hasn't stopped us from having a developer ecosystem. And in fact, like you oftentimes end up like self-selecting into the folks that want to be there, right? Because if you are now spending zero time on processing grant applications and mercenary value extractors and cross-chain folks, you get to spend all of your time with the folks that actually care about being on Berachain because it's Berachain, which is the best use of time in my seat, right? Like I have a limited number of hours in the day, as does everyone else on the team. And so we get to spend them with the folks that really matter.
Yeah, they're there solely because they want to be there, not because a grant brought them there, right? But why no grants on your end? Because you want people who are there for the right reasons, but then what if they can't afford to do it if there's no one like funding them? You know what I mean?
So yeah, I think there's it's a super good question. I think there's a few different reasons for this. The first is that in some capacity, because of that normalization process that I discussed earlier, proof of liquidity is actually like a real-time chain grants program, in that a validator might be economically optimizing. They might say, I'm only going to take the highest ROI at this point in time in the form of an application incentive for my block reward. But they might also be relationship maximizing or medium-term maximizing, where they might say, this application is really, really thoughtful. I'm going to take lower ROI on them today in like as a venture validator, basically, in exchange for holding their tokens over a longer period of time and participating in upside. The second component is that while we don't offer grants, it doesn't mean that we aren't willing to help with fundraising, right? And so if we think there's a really good project that we want to support that needs help getting off the ground, we are more than happy to help them connect that into our network. And realistically, that isn't something that we can do for every project, nor do we want to do for every project, candidly, because you want to keep things focused for investors on products that will, one, hopefully make the money so they keep coming back, and two, that are actually novel and thoughtful and Berachain specific. And then three, and perhaps like most importantly, is that I actually see grants as one, really inefficient ways of allocating capital, and two, oftentimes softly parasitic in a weird way, in that if you think about how grants are actually like implemented in practice, it's like, as an application, the more money you get for a grant, the more the chain needs you as an application to justify their valuation and get distribution. And so you are now getting paid in the chain's token for distribution that you are giving them, while also using that token for distribution to recursively justify the chain's distribution. And like it gets very, very weird. And if you are actually like grant maximizing, you'll oftentimes end up in an environment that is worst for you, if that is the only factor that you're optimizing for. Whereas, our general stance is that we are completely non-paternalistic, right? We want to offer you a menu of really cool products and things to do and different yield sources and different assets at different risk profiles with different counterparty risk, and say, take your pick, right? If you're a DGen and you understand how all this works, take your pick. And then my job as an extension of that is to also build a lot of really nice presented bow-tied packages for folks that might be less crypto native and don't really know what they're doing, but they say, look, like I have USDC, I trust Yearn or Veda or whoever to allocate my capital on my behalf. Can you help Yearn figure out what the right strategies are for me, right? And then my job is to work with those folks in this chain abstraction universe and offer folks also not just this complete buffet menu of like a horizontal perspective of different apps, but also of different ways to get involved.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity on that front to expand beyond just like the cookie cutter model that you're talking about, where it's like, hey, here's a grant, go away. Hey, here's a grant, come here,
Yeah. Oh, and the other quick thing I forgot to mention that's probably actually really relevant for this is that BGT, right? Like I said earlier, you delegate to a validator and you get rev share. And BGT can always be redeemed one-to-one for Bera, but not in the other direction. The only way to acquire Bera governance tokens is to provide liquidity in proof of liquidity, right? The users are putting their money where their mouth is. And when they then delegate, right, you now have a floor for BGT, which is always Bera. And then your upside is basically, is BGT generating sufficient fees to incentivize me to continue delegating this rather than burning it? And if we aren't generating sufficient fees, everyone will burn for Bera and then sell their Bera. And so as a result, Berachain's literal incentive is to create as much fees as possible. And fees in this case are applications incentivizing validators. And the only way that happens is if application value is good, right? Because that's what actually is the primary pool. And as a result, like my incentive on Berachain, right? Like if we think back to that grant example, everything in the grant example is predicated on the chain's valuation as the fundamental premise.
Mm-hmm.
For Berachain, the fundamental premise is at value, and then the chain's value derives from that. And so it's actually like the complete inverse of the grant and traditional chain style of distribution. And it's not just something that is lip service, like we've literally codified it into the mechanism of proof of liquidity.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Jack, I want to know, you've probably had your hands full for a number of months now, ever since you've probably joined the team, especially pre-mainnet, coming up to the mainnet. What is the strategy post-mainnet? I feel like for a lot of chains, this is like the defining moment that can really, create the path forward of, success or not failure, but like you only launch your mainnet once, hopefully.
Yep.
Unless you like completely restructure the chain and do something new, which I've seen like once or twice, I feel like. But like that's not something that's not in the books. So you have this one-time shot to really get it right. And then like afterwards, you got to like run with the strategy, especially on the DeFi front, which is so heavily integrated, I believe, into Berachain's mission, right? So kind of walk us through like what your plan is.
Yeah. So the plan up until this point has largely been getting as many application integrations pre-built on mainnet as possible, for mainnet as possible. Check, yeah. Seeding initial liquidity, which is what we've been doing through Boyka, right? And so day one, the idea was a user should be able to show up and things just work, right? Mm-hmm. There's things for you to do. There's
crazy concept.
There. Right? Like you'd think it was rocket science, given that we're the first chain that's doing this. But here we are for some reason, and it feels quite intuitive.
Things will work here. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, knock on wood.
Yeah, there you go.
And yeah, exactly. And then post mainnet, I think the mindset is right. Like in this universe where you have 250 plus applications, you can't cover all of the surface area pre-mainnet. And so the first leg of that is like, okay, let's make sure we're finishing getting all that initial cohort built out, integrations done, onboarding infrastructure providers, doing all the basics. Mm-hmm. The second leg is I'm really going to then spend a lot of time working with these teams to make sure everyone understands how they can best utilize proof of liquidity. Because I think there's really varying degrees of sophistication even within the Berachain ecosystem. And a lot of folks understand proof of liquidity at the most basic level in terms of like, how do I use it within my existing framework? But I think there's also a lot of theory crafting I've done on extensions of proof of liquidity and how you can utilize those that folks will find really interesting. Like how do you use proof of liquidity for incentivizing trading activity on a perps exchange, let's say, right? Which is something that no one's done to date. And then from there, I think I'll also spend a lot of time really working through our viewpoints on two major categories, one being chain abstraction. This is something that I've gotten into arguments about in the past. I think a lot of folks see chain abstraction as this panacea for everything wrong with crypto. But the reality is that your chain abstraction is still only as good as the applications that you have under the hood. And so that's why for us, applications always come first. And then the second is chain abstraction can take a lot of different forms based off of different users. And so I think all chain abstraction is roughly moving towards the same point, but everyone from a provider perspective is making different trade-offs as they get there, right? In that Infinex is saying, I'm focused really, really heavily on the wallet management component of it. And I have very few DeFi integrations today, but I'm going to build a lot of those product integrations over time. Someone like DapDap, who built the Berachain thing that I mentioned earlier, is like, look, the wallet side's fine. Just connect with your Rabby wallet. We're going to abstract all of the application interactions away, right? And so we're taking opinionated bets on a few of those different providers. And the goal is to hopefully bring them together in such a way that you end up with a lot of different options as an end user for how you choose to interact with the chain. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing I'll spend some time working on is like, I'm actually really interested in the L2 design space. It's something I've spent a lot of time on. And I weirdly think that proof of liquidity helps fix some of the issues that L2s have faced in the past. One being like, how do you justify an L2 token valuation? Like a gas token obviously doesn't do it. Their sequencers are centralized, et cetera. And so I think there's really cool design space there with proof of liquidity where if I'm an L2, I actually think I would rather have like USDC or Honey as my chain stable, as my chain gas token, because now my onboarding process is super simple. I don't have to get people into whatever random esoteric token I've launched, right? All you have to have is dollars. And then instead, you can focus on value creation elsewhere using proof of liquidity. And so I think that's going to be something that will be really cool. And there will be a handful of very large L2s, let's just say, launching on Berachain within the first kind of like 6 to 12 months post-launch that I think will help kind of progress the Bera extended universe.
That's exciting. I guess we're going to have to do another episode then when they all launch and everything's coming through, right? Lastly,
exactly.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I guess, looking forward at everything, or maybe looking back, let's pretend you're in the future. What would have to be true out of everything that you just said for you to feel like this was a success?
I think if Boyko goes live and everything goes smoothly, the chain goes live, everything goes smoothly, and
just
app
smooth
developers,
ride.
yeah, like no, those particular things, like I've literally been working 18 hours a day for a long time, just trying to make sure all of the ops are handled right. I think folks think mostly about the tech and smart contract risk and things like that, and that's a big component of it. But there's also this other element, which is like coordinating, tens of teams across hundreds of markets, all of these different line items of trying to get asynchronous groups of people to march in lockstep. That is almost impossible. That will be a big relief when it goes live. But the biggest thing for me is and will always be if application developers come to me post-launch and they say, I feel really good about how this went. I feel like I got the support I needed. I feel like I got the resources I needed. And I feel like I have a better chance to be successful on Berachain than I do on another chain. And the goal is never to, like I said, to be paternalistic and say to folks, like, you will succeed on Berachain, right? Like, that's not realistic. And anyone who says that to you is a charlatan and a liar. But rather to say to them that I want to give you the best chance of being successful that you will get anywhere else. Exactly, right? And it's like, look, there has to be a market for your product. But my goal is to make sure that if that market exists, you will find it here.
Yeah, I love that. Jack, last thing, you've been in the space for a while. Can you leave us with a piece of advice?
Great question. A piece of advice is if you want to do this for real, and what I mean is by getting into it full time and being thoughtful and knowledgeable about the space, the best thing that you can do is care, right? And I know that sounds super cliche, but this is the same thing everyone will tell you. There's no substitute for downloading a wallet, for getting in the trenches, for asking questions and being thoughtful, doing legwork. My motto was always people help people that help themselves. My dad passed that one down to me. And so I always went in and I tried to educate myself as much as possible. And then if I came in and I asked someone to help me after that, I never once, I think, had someone tell me just to get out of here, right? There was always a willingness and an eagerness that I think is part of that anon culture to help folks that seek to educate themselves. And so, step off the cliff, dive into the abyss, join us. The water's warm down here, and it's a great time.
Love that. Thank you so much for coming on today, Jack. It was a pleasure.
It's my pleasure always, Jackie. Thank you.